Daniel 1, verse 1. Okay?
In the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it.
Okay, so in these verses right here, these first two verses, not only do they introduce the opening chapter, but they introduce the entire theme of the whole book, and they give us a historical framework, chronological peg to date the events in the chapter and following. Unlike Jonah, where you have to infer when the event took place. Unlike Habakkuk, where you have to infer. But like Zephaniah, right? The word of the Lord which came unto Zephaniah, the son of Cushi, the son of Gedaliah, the son of Emariah, the son of Hezekiah, in the days of Josiah, the son of Adon, king of Judah, 7 generations back. So the opening verse gives us that historical, chronological peg for these awful events, probably the most awful events in the history of Judah, take place in chapter 1, verses 1 and 2. So not only do they give us a chronological peg, following, it therefore gives us a historical peg. You can date the people and you know the people in the book, and it gives us a geographical picture to our mind's eye when we're reading the text. Now, King Jehoiakim, mentioned right off the bat here, was born in 634, approximately 634 BC. As you can see from the PowerPoint right here. Okay, Jehoiakim. So you have Solomon, Rehoboam, Abijah, Asa, Jehoshaphat, Joram, Jordan, Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, Hezekiah, Manasseh, Amon, Hezekiah. So he's 14 from David. Okay? Approximately 14 kings from King David. Now, this guy, born in 634, as you can see right here, was the son of the famous Josiah. The famous, what can we call him? The reformer. Of course, he met an untimely death. He was killed in action by an archer in an Egyptian chariot, and his body was carried back to, of course, that 2 Chronicles 36:22, which mentions him being shot by the archer. And then his body, hello, Ron, greetings. His body was brought back to Megiddo, as you can see right here. Now, this battle where Josiah was killed, the father of Jehoiakim, there's an aerial shot of Megiddo right there. Right here would be the Aruna Pass, famous Aruna Pass where Thutmose III went through. And then this location, Haran, this is where Josiah met his untimely death. Now, Haran literally means crossroads. And of course, it'll be biblically speaking all the way back to Genesis chapter 11. And Abram's father, Terah, died at Haran. Not only did Abram's father die there, this is where Jacob goes. This is where all the patriarchs, right? This is the home turf up there in Haran. This is where they have the family members, the clans, the relatives, right? Isaac's wife, etc. Up in Haran. Okay, now, this guy, Jehoiakim, who we're talking about in chapter 1, verse 1, his name was changed by Pharaoh. Necho, by the way, Pharaoh means something like the great house, the great house. And Pharaoh changed his name to Jehoiakim. His original name was Eliakim. And And Pharaoh Necho did this about 624. Now remember, when we think about the geopolitics of the world in the Bible, we want to think of it kind of in terms of cats and mice. Okay? The cats are, depending on the ebb and flow, Assyria, Babylon, Mesopotamia, Egypt, and Rome. And the mice are, generally speaking, anyone who ends in a ite. Hittites, Jebusites, Israelites. And so upon the death of his father, Josiah, Egypt perceives Israel being weak, and then the cat invades the land, right, and gobbles up as many mice as it possibly can. Okay, so Jehoiakim was established on the throne by the Pharaoh Necho of Egypt in about 624 approximately. Now, Jehoiakim, guys, this is that same evil king who in 604 BC cut up and threw into the fire the famous 70-year prophecy scroll of Jeremiah. And this is all recorded in Jeremiah 36, 9 through 32. So, upon Jehoiakim now being established on the throne by the Pharaoh, the Egyptian army, they seized heavy taxation on Judah and the silver and gold and etc. And then they would have deposited that into the bank of the Egyptian government. And this is all in 2 Kings 24:35. So all of these events are right on the cusp of the Babylonian invasions starting in 605, which we'll talk about later. Now, Jehoiakim had a son, and his name was Jeconiah. And what you see here is a fragment of a Babylonian tablet that mentions the name Jeconiah, pretty neat, and his daily rations that he was allotted while in captivity in Babylon. So Jehoiakim's son, Jeconiah, he's the one who goes into captivity when the Babylonians come, starting in about 605. Now, this famous or infamous Jeconiah, this is the same king who in Jeremiah 22:30, Jeremiah pronounced a curse, if you remember that, upon his throne and upon his descendants, that no one from the lineage of David could ever rule from Judah as king. Now, sons of David ruled as exilarchs in Babylon, kind of like functioning de facto presidents, because someone has to be a ruler in Babylon, right, over the people. And they were sons of David who ruled over the people in Babylon. But the curse of Jeremiah 22:30 to Jehoiakim's son, I know it's getting, this is maybe a little confusing, but we have to get all of this ironed out. Okay? Jeconiah's descendants could no longer sit on the throne. So, Jeconiah, in effect, lost both land and family because he could have no more descendants sit on his throne, and he lost his land because he was taken in captivity. So essentially, in the world of the Bible, he's dead. No land and no family. Now, if a son of David cannot sit on the throne, according to Jeremiah 22:30, i.e., Jehoiakim's son Jeconiah, how could Jesus, the son of David, then qualify as king to sit on the throne of David if there's a curse pronounced on it in Jeremiah 22:30? Well, in short, by being adopted by Joseph, exactly, Jesus is legally identified as the son of David through his father's line, but because Joseph is not Yeshua, Jesus' biological father, he avoids the curse on the seed of Jeconiah. Now, still in verse 1. The first of these three waves of deportation from Judah to Babylon occurs in 605. Now, this first wave of invasions, this included the capturing of the ruling elite, This is in 2 Chronicles 36, 5 and 6. We're talking your princes, your governors, your captains, your sheriffs, etc. But also the choice young men, which we'll be reading about in a few minutes, right? And, which we'll talk about more in the next verse, the vessels of the house of God, of the temple. Now, the second wave of deportation, this occurred in 597 BC. And this second wave of deportation then included Jeconiah. Jehoiakim, who's mentioned in this verse 1, his son, was taken in 597. And the religious elite, the princes, I should say, the priests, etc. And this wave also included Ezekiel. Okay? 2 Kings 24, 11 through 16. So the third and final deportation, this took place in 586 on what's remembered as the 9th of Av. That is, this year, it was August 11th. Okay? August 11th this year. Now, the first temple was destroyed on the 9th of Av in 586. And the second temple, according to tradition, was destroyed on the 9th of Av also in AD 70. And the 9th of Av was so deep-rooted in Jews to this very day. When you go into a religious Jew's house, they should, at least, when you walk in the front door, on all of the beautifully painted walls, there's an unfinished portion of the wall. That mar is supposed to remind you of the destruction of the temple. Not only that, in a wedding ceremony, in the midst of all this joy and glee, to kind of get drawn back down to earth, what do? They smash the glass wrapped in the napkin, don't they? And say, Mazel tov, right? Just to real quickly remind us that we don't have a temple and it's gone and it's destroyed. So a couple of daily life examples of how this day, the 9th of Av, 586, is so deep-rooted in the Jews. So, not only was the temple destroyed, as we can see here, but the de facto king, the puppet king, Zedekiah, and all the remaining strongmen, all the able-bodied prisoners were deported all the way to Babylon. Now, what in the world are you going to do with all of these Jews that you just deported to Babylon? You got to keep them busy. All the time and energy and effort and money it took to bring them. About 700 miles. Well, Herodotus, the Greek historian, says that the Jews, part and parcel of their mission there, was to build a canal which connected the Tigris and the Euphrates River. Think of the Tigris and the Euphrates as like Highway 99 and Highway 5 if you live in Babylon. Okay? The vast majority of traffic goes up and down, north and south, at least those two routes. And so the Jews kind of made an 80 maybe, that goes east-west, right? That connects 5 and that connects 99. So after the 3 invasions, the only Israelites left in the land were called the quote-unquote people of the land. And they're mentioned in 2 Kings 25:12. Now, these would have been peasants, essentially, who were left in the land of Israel, according to 2 Kings 25:12, to till and to work the land, primarily for the tummy of the Babylonian army who is still residing there. Okay? And so here's a modern-day example of, we can call them fellahim in Egypt today, just simple peasants working the land. Okay? So this is all that's left in Israel after the destruction of the temple. Okay? All of these events take place before 1/1 starts. Okay? Now, Nebuchadnezzar's name is mentioned here, as you can see. Now, Nabu-Kaduri-Utsur is his name. It starts out with Nabu. Nabu is the chief deity of Babylon. You can see his picture right there. Kuduri means to protect. And Utzer means the borders. So the name his daddy gave him, well, obviously they didn't live in Arizona. Okay. Nabu, god of Babylon, my son, may he protect the borders, i.e. of the Babylonian, Neo-Babylonian kingdom. Okay? Names mean something in the world of the Bible. They're full of weight and significance. Now, he began his reign, Nebuchadnezzar, his reign of 43 long years. He began to reign in 605. And at that time, Babylon was considered the jewel of all of the kingdoms. Babylon was the glory of the Babylonians' pride. And this is mentioned in Isaiah 13:19. Now, as we finish up this verse real quick, Nebuchadnezzar's daddy was Nabopolassar. And he was the founder of this Neo-Babylonian empire. And that guy reigned 21 years, from 626 to 605. What you're looking at here is a cuneiform tablet, similar to this replica right here, that mentions the name of Nabopolassar. Okay? Now, the captives then are obviously taken to Babel, i.e. Babylon. And in the Akkadian tongue, that would be the language of the people of Babylon. It literally means the gates of the gods. Babylon. The gates of the gods. Verse 2. Zach.
And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hands, with some of the articles of the house of God, which he carried into the land of Shinar, to the house of his God. And he brought the articles into the treasure house of his God.
Okay, so the point is made right off the bat when he says the Lord gave Judah into his hand, into Nebuchadnezzar's hand. The Adonai is used here, right? Big L, little O, little R, little D. He afflicted punishment on his rebellious people, Judah, by a nation that was less righteous than they are. For like a parallel reading of the events that had just taken place, you could read like Habakkuk chapter 1. Okay. Now, by the hand of the Lord. Now, the Hebrew word hand is yad, transliterated Y-A-D, and figuratively it is used to describe authority or power of a man or even of a god. And in the scriptures, not only in the scriptures, in the world of the Bible, it's always the right hand. The right hand of the Lord doeth valiantly. It's never the left. Because the left hand is the unclean hand, right? You clean yourself with your left hand, never your right hand. Okay? In the world of the Bible. So it's always the right hand of the Lord that doeth valiantly. Now, as we read in this verse, we hear about these temple treasures, don't we? It was common, very common, for all the temples in the world of the Bible and in the ancient Near East to have a special space designated for sacred objects, religious objects. Even the Philistines, when they capture the Ark of the Covenant, right, they bring it into the temple of Dagon. This is a common custom. So the temple in Jerusalem, like we read about here, he brought the vessels into the treasure house of his God. Even the temple in Jerusalem had designated storage areas. So you're looking at an aerial shot of the Temple Mount platform. And then you zoom in through the roof. You have, according to tradition, what was the Holy of Holies. You cannot go in there after 9/11. unfortunately. And then underneath that is what's called the Well of Souls. Okay, you just walk up these stairs right here, and then you're on this level. Then you walk down there, then you're in that level. These are treasure rooms. Okay, and then underneath that, then you have an artist rendition. This is underneath the Temple Mount, which is, the Temple Mount is basically like an upside down shoebox. Okay, and it's honeycombed on the inside. Just a bunch of tunnels. Okay, primarily to bring water from the north. I mean, if you're sacrificing tens of thousands of animals every day, you need a lot of water. There's a lot of cleanup. And as you can see from that artist rendition, that's something like what it looks like. So underneath there, all of these chambers, these are where these special objects would have gone when they weren't on display. So Nebuchadnezzar, following the standard of what they do when in Rome, so to speak, brought the conquered temple treasures from Jerusalem to Babylon. And this is recorded in 2 Kings 25, 8 through 21. So not only did he take these vessels and put, here's an example of probably what they looked like. He would have taken those vessels and put them in the presence of his god Marduk, the chief deity of Babylon. Okay? Now, remember, only the vessels were taken in the temple. Not the image of the invisible God, because the invisible God, well, he already left, right, before the destruction of the temple in 586, when the Shekinah glory left the temple, remember? And then went to the east in the book of Ezekiel. So, now this capturing or abducting of these temple treasures was prophesied long ago in the book of Isaiah, in chapter 39, verse 6. If you'll recall, Isaiah had just recovered from an illness, and Babylonian emissaries were sent to inquire about his well-being. And Hezekiah thought it would have been a good idea to show them all of the temple treasures. And then, of course, in Isaiah 39:6, we read about that prophecy that these will one day be taken away. And it took about 100 or 150 years for that prophecy to happen, but nevertheless, this is the fulfillment of Isaiah 39:6. So the total number of the objects taken from the temple in Jerusalem to Babylon were 5,400 objects. And of course, this is recorded in Ezra chapter 1, verse 11. Ezra 1:11 tells us this. Now, at the end of Chronicles, there's a summed up laundry list of the objects taken, as well as in Ezra, but there's no mention of the ark being taken, which we'd like to think about. What happened? Where did it go? All of these kind of things. And we have Maccabees, which is a very solid historical book that tells us, for whatever it's worth, that it was taken and buried in Mount Nebo on the east side of the Jordan River. And then, of course, you have fairy tales, don't you? Like the Ethiopian story of, right, the church there that has it, and who knows? Who knows? But nevertheless, the ark wasn't taken because the priests had enough of a heads up that the Babylonians were coming to put it wherever they put it. Now, the name of the temple, if you care, where these objects were put on display in Babylon, is Esagila, Asigla. That's the proper name of the magnificent temple of Marduk in Babylon, right in the middle of town square, so to speak. Now, Marduk, this Babylonian god, was not the nation's prime deity, but he was up there. His popular name is also called Bel, B-E-L. And this is mentioned in Isaiah 46:1, among other places. Okay? Bel is Marduk, Marduk is Bel, kind of thing. Okay? Now, even in Jeremiah, in 27:16 through 22, he also mentions all of these prominent objects that were taken and brought off to Babylon. All the precious religious objects, but he does not also mention the ark. Now, this was both a physical and a symbolic demonstration, the Babylonians, of the superiority of their deity in their mind. Right? My God is stronger than your God, because I was able to come to you and conquer you and take your God and all of your God's vessels and bring them to my house. Now, this is just like 1 Samuel 5:12 with Dagon. Right? We're going to take your ark, we're going to bring it into our temple. Well, of course, we know how that account ends up going, but nevertheless, this is like in Jeremiah 38:7. We see that Chemosh, Chemosh, the god of Moab, was taken, and he went into exile. The statue went into exile with the people of Moab. Just like the invisible God of the temple departs his glory and goes east and goes into exile with his people. Does that make sense? Okay? Same kind of package. That's in Ezekiel 11:23. Now, as we look at this verse, we see the term Shinar here, don't we? Now, this is a very, very archaic term. Of course, its roots are in Genesis chapter 10. This region was originally ruled by Nimrod and the sons of Cush. Noah's son, Ham, had a son named Cush, and one of his sons were Nimrod. And it says, and he went forth and built Babylon, Erech, Akkad, Nineveh, etc. Okay, so he's the founder of Nineveh. Not only Nineveh, but Babylon, Nimrod. And his wife, her name was Semiramis. And Nimrod, according to tradition, was deified shortly after his death. I mean, this is right after the flood. And he becomes one of the first, God men on earth. Okay? Pre-pharaonic, pre-pharaoh God man. It's in his death, he's elevated to deity, but nevertheless. Now, this region that the Jews are carried off to, Shinar, Babylon, etc., in Zechariah chapter 5, in verses 5 through 11, it's considered the quote-unquote dwelling of iniquity and wickedness. The dwelling of iniquity and wickedness is Babel. Why? Because it is the root of spiritual harlotry, i.e. Genesis 11, the Tower of Babel. Now, the land of Shinar after Babel, okay, it doesn't get much press in the Old Testament, okay, but it's still, ironically, it becomes then the kind of the north or the right pole of Judaism. You have Babylon, right, and then you have Jerusalem. Okay, Babel eventually becomes like the home base of the Jews, especially after the destruction of the temple in 586. Now, it is as if Daniel here is reminding us that this is the land of Babylon. This is the land where the chosen nation came from, i.e. Abraham, from Ur the Chaldeans. So this is the land where you people came from, but you are now exiled from the promised land back to this land of confusion, this land of Babel. Why? Obviously because of their spiritual harlotry. Now, one of the main reasons why, of course, the Jews were deported was because of their idol worship. By the way, here's an image called the Titus Arch that shows the Romans carrying away the trophies of war like the Babylonians would have done and brought them to Babylon. But idol worship was one of the main reasons why the Jews were deported from Jerusalem to Babylon. And interestingly enough, there is scant or little archaeological evidence of any idols in Israel after the Babylonian invasion. Persians, Greeks, Romans, there's very, very little evidence of idols found. So it seems they really learned their lesson. Okay? Okay. Verse 3. Verse 3. Can you read verse 3?
Yep. When the king ordered Ashpenaz, the chief of his officials, to bring some of the sons of Israel, including some of the royal family and of the nobles.
Okay, so Ashpenaz. Ashpenaz. This guy was the quote-unquote chief of the eunuchs, and we'll unpack that in a minute, in the court of Nebuchadnezzar. Okay? Now, his name probably means something like innkeeper or something like that. Probably. Some have suggested that it means like I will make prominent or a horse's nose. I mean, who knows? Okay. But it probably means something like innkeeper, which fits very nicely with the narrative here. Okay. Now, the chief eunuch, Ashpenaz, and those under him, all of those eunuchs under him, I wasn't there, I don't know, but they were probably likely castrated. Because that's what eunuchs are. That's what they're called, eunuchs. Okay? We'll get to that in a moment. Now, guys, to us in the 21st century, this seems outrageous, but this was a very common custom in the Oriental world. Especially for those in positions of authority as superintendents over harems, right? And other offices of the court. Example, the Ethiopian eunuch in the book of Acts, right? He's the right-hand man of Candace. Well, you have to be fixed before you can do that. That's just the world that these guys live in. Okay? Now, Ashpenaz, the main character, at least in this verse, he's going to handpick many of these young men and make them overseers of their Babylonian education. He's going to watch over them and make sure that these guys get good grades and that these guys eat right and that these guys, right, excel so that they can work as political kind of pawns, like a chess match, in that part of the world. Okay? Their job is to be advisors or politicians or ambassadors or emissaries. That's what Daniel and Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego are being raised up to be. Okay? Senators, congressmen, maybe. This is the closest kind of parallel that we can think of. Now, we have the word Israel here, don't we? And interestingly enough, the book of Daniel, as we'll see next week, is divided into a Hebrew section and an Aramaic section, isn't it? And the word Israel doesn't appear in the Aramaic section, which is kind of interesting, and we'll unpack that more later, but only in the Hebrew section. And it appears in chapter 9, in chapter 1, and that's it. The word Israel in the whole book. Now, question. How were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, i.e. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, how were they nobility? How were they royal family? I mean, you just don't want anyone to be trained up to be a senator, a congressman, an ambassador, a politician, etc. Now, the scriptures don't tell us. That's the simple version of it, but Josephus, for whatever it's worth, claims that they were related to Hezekiah, or excuse me, to Zedekiah, the last king, they're descendants of his, which shouldn't shock us too much, because Zephaniah, remember, the prophet, he's related to Josiah, okay? And Jerome, the 4th, 5th century church historian, for whatever it's worth, he says that they were related to Hezekiah, okay? Nevertheless, okay, these 4 young men, along with countless others, throughout all of the Fertile Crescent area, were now captive in Babylon. They had this diplomatic, this ambassadorial training in Jerusalem before they were taken captive. Okay? It's not like we're just going to take these guys and bring them to Babylon and make them ambassadors. It's more than likely that they had ambassadorial training in Jerusalem before they were taken captive. Right? These guys, they're harder, you know. Now, like I said before, they need to now be prepped on how to be these links, these correspondence needed between Jerusalem and Babylon. Yeah, Jerusalem was destroyed, but there's still a huge Babylonian presence there. It needs, right? You can't tweet or text someone, right? You need people to go back and forth and to communicate. So, over 100 years before 586, 597, and 605 took place, in Isaiah 39:7, Isaiah prophesied that because of Hezekiah's folly of letting the Babylonians see the temple treasures, that a captivity would occur and that the sons of Judah would become eunuchs. Okay? Isaiah 39:7. Verse 4. Verse 4. Liz?
Children in whom was no blemish, but well favored and skillful in all wisdom, and cunning in knowledge, and understanding science, and such as had ability in them to stand in the king's palace, and whom they might teach the learning and the tongue of the Chaldeans.
Okay. So the prerequisites for this position were, if you want to serve in the proper setting in Babylon, you need to be the right age. You need to have the right genealogy. You need to have the right intellect. You need to have the right physical appearance. And finally, you need to know palace or learn palace etiquette. You want to serve in Nebuchadnezzar's right hand? I mean, this is like the Queen of Hearts, right? Off of the head, if you mess up. Okay? So these guys have the best shot at it, and this is the qualifications that are needed to aim towards this. Now, the giftedness of these children, of these young men, right? It's kind of the same picture, the same word that's used of Bezalel, the son of Uri, the son of Hur, who designed the vessels for the tabernacle. Remember that guy? Right? They're kind of pictured in the same way. Right? They have this giftedness about them, like he did. So, as Moses earlier excelled in wisdom and in knowledge in Egypt, in a foreign land, these boys were dedicated to that same excellence in education. Now, we see here and following that both Bezalel in Exodus 35:31, if you care, and these young men they're both called skillful in wisdom and in knowledge and in understanding. Same three words. So obviously the author, he's reaching back to Bezalel, right, and kind of thinking in those same terms. Skillful in wisdom, knowledge, and understanding. Now, if indeed Daniel and these other young men taken captive, i.e. from Syria, from Egypt, from Haran, everywhere along the main route, if they were unwittingly forced, if they were forced to become eunuchs in the traditional sense of the term, right? Everyone with me? They were not so in Israel. They may not even have been eunuchs in the traditional sense of the term, because right here it says they had no blemish. Okay? Now, there were very particular regulations in Jewish law that you could not enter into the congregation of the Lord if you are wounded in the stones or have your private member cut off. Deuteronomy 23:1. Okay? So obviously, if they were eunuchs, they were not eunuchs in Israel, because in Israel they would never do that, because you can't enter into the temple, you can't enter into the congregation of the Lord, because you're barred. Okay? Also, that term having no blemish, it's also mentioned in Leviticus in 21:21, that Aaron's sons had no blemish. It's also used for the sacrifices in Numbers 19:2. And by the way, Babylonians also had similar rules and regulations for those who were mediators or etc. Right? They did no blemish upon you. Now, these Hebrew captives, these guys would have been indoctrinated, as we see here, in the learning and tongue of the Chaldees. During break, if you want to, some of you might have seen this. You can go and look at this. Is a replica of a Babylonian cuneiform tablet. So I actually have a late friend named Anson Rainey who could pick one of these up, like a Maya tablet, and just read it. Pretty amazing. Yeah. And if you want to come up and break, look at this. This is a Babylonian calendar. Okay. So these guys were expected to master this. It's like, okay, I want you to go to, we'll say Cairo. You have 3 years to master Arabic and all of the customs and all of the mannerisms. Okay? You know, it's possible, but this is a big deal. So this is what these guys are looking to master. Now, cuneiform was, or Akkadian was at times like the lingua franca of the ancient Near East at times. So the minor letters, for example, they're much before Daniel, like 1400. But they were written in this. And this was the cats would talk to each other in this language. So it's possible that Hananiah and Mishael Azariah even had knowledge, maybe, right? They went to a good school in Jerusalem of this tongue. But nevertheless, so, by the way, the term Chaldean and the term Babylonian, when you read them in the scriptures, they're used interchangeably. They mean one and the same, okay? Just like Marduk and Bel, same kind of thing. Now, like I said, their language was Akkadian. Akkadian is a Semitic language, and as you can see here, fashioned in wedge-shaped letters on clay tablets, like right here. Their curriculum, their homework, would have also probably included some knowledge of Sumerian. Not only learning a little Sumerian, they need to learn the language of the priests of Babylon, the ecclesiology language of Babylon. They need to have a mastery of the Aramaic tongue. I mean, this is a big endeavor. I mean, wow. Verse 5. Verse 5. Jim?
The king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table. They were to be trained for 3 years, and after that, they were to enter the king's service.
Okay. Now, this would have been a true culture shock for these kosher young men. The king of Babylon, these guys were infamous for their lifestyles of the rich and famous, opulence. The ancient Persian kings, these guys had a very similar custom. 1 Kings 4, 22, 23 gives an example of Solomon's over-the-top daily provisions. The Hebrew word for meat here is followed by a noun, which means the king's meat. So these guys are eating at King Arthur's table. Okay? Now, this underlines the important fact that this food you're eating comes from, i.e., the king's pocket. The king's paying for you to sit down and enjoy this wonderful meal. So the pressure's on even more, isn't it, to eat it? Now, there wasn't any ordinary food, guys. There's no hot dogs or Doritos, okay? These are royal delicatessens. Just read that 1 Kings 4:22 passage sometime. And it's top shelf stuff imported from all over the ancient Near East that Solomon's eating on every single day. He's not eating, what do you call that stuff, that noodle stuff? Top ramen? He's not eating top ramen. Now, some people suggest that this 3-year education was just like a standard practice, kind of like a 4-year BA. Okay, like this was the standard practice. If you want to be in the Babylonian or the Persian court, you know, for your occupation, then it's a 3-year crash course. Anyways, at the end of this 3-year crash course, the young men have to stand before the king, where they would have to, in front of the king, give an oral exam, which you will be doing after 4 years, so there's some parallels there, right? And also a physical exam, including an interview with the king himself, okay, to determine if these guys would be introduced into royal service. Verse 6, Wesley, can you get that one, please?
Now among them, from the sons of Judah, were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah.
Very good. Now, among the multitude of the young men meeting the above qualifications, because there's a lot of people who did, from all these diverse nations that Nebuchadnezzar plucked up along the way, right? Some of them are from Judah, as we find out here. Now, of course, these young men are part and parcel of that captivity from 605, that first wave of captivity. And these names have some expectation attached to them. That's why they were given these names by their parents. All of them have what you would call a theophoric name. And you can hear, obviously, the name for God in there, Theos, right? You hear your name. So there's something in their names that's theophoric. It has God in it. For example, Daniel, you can see his name right here, means Elohim, or God judges. Because at the end of his name, you see the Aleph and the Lamed, Aleph, which is El. It's a clip form of Elohim. It can also mean one who delivers judgment in the name of Elohim. Hananiah, you can see right here, this means whom Yahweh gave. Whom Yahweh gave. And you can see at the end of his name, you have the Yod and the He. Right? The first half of Yahweh. Mishael, his name probably means something like who is what God is, who is what Elohim is, because you can see the El once again at the end of his name. And then finally, Azariah, his name means something like whom Yahweh helps, whom Yahweh helps. And once again, at the end of the name, you have the Yod and the He. Okay? Theophoric names, names pregnant with meaning. I just didn't name Hosanna for any reason. I didn't name Scarlet for any reason. Right? There's names, there's meanings in those names. Okay, chapter 1, verse 7. Zach.
To them the chief of the eunuchs gave names. He gave Daniel the name Belteshazzar, to Hananiah Shadrach, to Mishael Meshach, and to Azariah Abednego.
Abednego, exactly. Good. Okay, now in order to redefine the identity of these young Judean men, The Babylonian monarchy prescribes them new names, i.e. new identities, new characters, new goals in life, new gods to serve, new ambitions. Now, part of this is done to condition these young Hebrews, into the thought and practice of the Babylonians. You need to become Babylonian, i.e. you need to eat our food, you need to be called by our names, you need to know our religion, you need to, etc. Now, Daniel's new name means Bel's Prince. Not the Prince of Bel-Air, but Bel's Prince. Or the Prince whom Bel favors. And there's an image of Bel. So that's what Belteshazzar means. Right? The Prince whom Bel favors. Now, like his theophoric Judean name, he has a theophoric Babylonian name. Now, later in Daniel chapter 4, verse 8, okay, the aged wife, probably the aged wife of Nebuchadnezzar, she attests that Daniel was given his Babylonian name in honor of Nebuchadnezzar's chief deity. Okay? Now, Hananiah, his new name means something like the great scribe, something like that. Mishael, his new name means something like guest of the king, the guest of the king. And then finally, Azariah's new name means something like worshiper of Nebo, something like that, the god Nebo, or Nabu. Nebo was the god of wisdom and writing, and he was the son of Marduk, Nebo. So each of their new names now extols and praises and worships and gives admiration to a pagan god. Okay, verse 8. Liz.
But Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with a portion of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the prince of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself.
Okay. Now, there's probably at least two reasons why these young men chose to abstain from the royal diet of the Babylonians. First, the most obvious, of course, is the Mosaic Law. It did not permit the Jews to eat foodstuffs, these particular foodstuffs provided to them. It's all unkosher. Okay? Can't eat it. Secondly, by eating with the pagan king, with the monarchy, look at our culture is so different in so many ways. Like if you go to In-N-Out, you don't want anyone to sit next to you. Like if you're sitting at like a bar stool there, you know what I mean? Or if you're sitting in a booth and the other side of the booth is open, you don't want a stranger sitting in there and just like looking right into your face and you're eating double. Okay? But in their world, when you eat with someone, that instills a sense of loyalty to that person and an allegiance to that person that we don't even comprehend. Like it says in Obadiah, how does it go? They laid a wound under me. They set a trap when I was eating bread, which is a bad thing. Right? He's eating bread with his friends, right? And they set a trap for him. Because the last thing you're going to expect when you're eating bread with your friends is that they're going to lay a trap for you. Right? There's this loyalty that's built into it. So, Those are the two reasons. Number one, it's against the Mosaic law. And number two, their culture would have forced upon them, instilled in them, a loyalty and an allegiance to the king and to the king's system by sitting down and eating at the table with him. Verse 9. Verse 9. Oh, yeah.
Now God granted Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the commander of officials.
Okay. So the duration of time that these young men have been enrolled in the school of Babylon has not been given. Okay? Nevertheless, the text here conveys the notion that Daniel has proven his merit to the prince of the eunuchs. He's been there long enough to show, right, that he's got what it takes to do the job. So again, the reader is reminded that in the midst of captivity, in the midst of the destruction of the temple, God's still in control of the situation. And a literary connection may be drawn here between Daniel and the others in exile. The same concept of obtaining mercy or obtaining favor, which he does here, in captivity from the masters of the Hebrews, these Gentile masters of the Hebrews. The same package is also found in the account of Joseph. In Genesis 39:21, when he found favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison, and in Ezra 7:28, in Nehemiah 2:8. Jews in captivity in a foreign land finding favor, same word used here, finding favor from their masters. Okay? Verse 10. Wesley, got that one, bud? 10, please.
And the commander of the officials said to Daniel, I am afraid, my lord the king, who has appointed your food and your drink. But why should he see your faces looking more haggard than these who are your own age? Then you would make me forfeit my head to the king.
Now, the prince of the eunuchs had very good reason to fear the king, because it was common for these ancient Near Eastern kings to immediately execute anyone at their displeasure, i.e. Daniel chapter 6, verse 24. Now, to refuse to consume, to eat and drink of the food of the king would have been a tremendous insult to the king himself, and not only that, to the deity, to the God of the king that this food was offered to before they sat down and ate. Does that make sense? Now, never mind. I'm just going to talk about being a missionary, eating at people's houses, and you don't want to eat what's put in front of you. But that doesn't apply to this. Okay. Sometimes you just have to grin and bear it. You know, those sloppy joes. You just, yes. I guess it's part. Then someone points to that verse in Luke where it says, eat what is placed in front of you. But anyways, okay. Now, it's unlikely, guys, that the king would have had any kind of continual communication with these guys while they're in school for 3 years. Okay? He's up in Beverly Hills, okay, and they're in Reading, stuff. Okay? But nevertheless, the prince of the eunuchs is likely thinking ahead to the end of the 3-year period when these young men have to stand before the king, and if their appearance was emaciated, if they're just thin, then that would be blamed on him, the prince of the eunuchs, and he would lose his head. Verse 11. Liz.
Then said Daniel to Melzar, whom the prince of the eunuchs had set over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah.
Okay, who is Melzar? I mean, he just shows up on the scene. First time it's mentioned. Melzar is a name of Persian descent, and it probably means something like officer or guardian of the court, something like that. Guardian of the court in Babylon. And Melzar, he's called the prince of the eunuchs in the previous verse. And he, therefore, is a lower ranking and a subservient official to Ashpenaz, because remember in chapter 1, verse 3, he's called the master of the eunuchs. Okay? Ashpenaz is the master of the eunuchs. This guy's called the officer, the guardian of the eunuchs. Now, we see here that there's a continuation, isn't there, of identifying the young men with their Hebrew names, even though they've already officially received their Babylonian names. This highlights, among other things, their attempts to resist the pagan traditions and the pagan culture which contradicted their love and adherence to the scriptures and to the living God. I live in the world, but I'm not of the world. Verse 12. Jane.
Please test your servants for 10 days. Give us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink.
So Daniel wisely chooses a non-confrontational approach when he proposes to Melzar a non-binding trial. Okay. So instead of eating the food from the king's table, he suggests eating veggies and herbs. Probably the kind of diet that people ate before the fall. Every green herb have I given unto thee. Now, this so-called Daniel diet is trying, to say the least. I tried it 3 years ago, 4 years ago, when I was teaching here, right before I was getting married, because you want to be polished before you get married. So for 10 days, I tried the Daniel diet. Water and veggies. Wow. It is hard. No bread, no steak, no meat, just veggies and water. You'll drop some major pounds, okay? But I just felt so emaciated. I could wonder why Ashpenaz and Melzar were so concerned. Someone else tried it with me too. So, if you want extra credit, 10 days is a long time. It's a long time to eat just veggies and water. Okay. Verse 13. Verse 13. Right, got that one?
And let our countenances be looked upon before thee, and the countenance of the children that eat of the portion of the king's meat, and as thou seest, deal with thy servant. Okay,
so basically Daniel is just continuing to petition Melzar that at the end of the 3-year trial, the end of the 10-day trial, to test their outward appearance from the others taken captive, the other young men taken captive in the Fertile Crescent. Okay. Verse 14. Liz.
So he consented to them in this matter and proved them 10 days.
Okay, so Melzar, he authorized the trial. Now remember, Melzar is under Ashpenaz. Melzar authorizes the trial, probably under the nose of Ashpenaz, right? He doesn't even know everything that goes on, kind of thing, right? And it's interesting that a notion of a period of 10 days being a period of trial, this goes all the way even into the book of Revelation, with the angel of the church of Smyrna, in the second church mentioned. He says that you will have tribulation 10 days. So just a kind of neat 10-day trial duration period. Verse 15. Verse 15. Zach.
And at the end of the 10 days, their feet Their features appeared better and fatter in flesh than all the young men who ate the portions of the king's delicacies.
Okay, so the underlying or the undergirding theme of the chapter is, even though the children of Israel are in exile, even though you're facing these tremendous temptations from the pagan world, even though the temple is destroyed, even though your sacrificial system is gone, even though the Shekinah glory has left the temple, the hand of God is with those who are wise, no matter where they are, and no matter what situation they're in, no matter if you're in a prison in Potiphar, Joseph, no matter if you're Ezra, no matter if you're Nehemiah. Now, after the 10-day trial, an idiom is used to express the health of these young men by calling them, quote unquote, fair and fatter in flesh. And this just paints a picture of a plump person, the opposite of those who are emaciated or those who are under a siege, like in the Lamentations 4:9, who are pining away and stricken through for want. Okay, they're plump, they're perfect, right? They have just enough meat on their bones. Okay? All right, verse 16. Verse 16. Zach.
Thus the steward took away their portions of delicacies and the wine that they were to drink, and gave them vegetables.
Okay, so after the 10-day examination, the young men's petition to adhere only to a kosher diet is likely recognized and granted. Okay? Now, the remainder of the chapter probably covers the remaining 2 years and 11 months that these young men were in Babylon learning the tongue of the Chaldees. Okay? Verse 17. Jane?
To these 4 young men, God gave knowledge and understanding of all kinds of literature and learning. And Daniel could understand visions and dreams of all kinds.
Okay, so the hallmark of these young men after their 3-year education in Babylon was that their God-given ability in wisdom and in knowledge. The wisdom came from the same God who gave Jerusalem into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar. This is that God gave them knowledge, right? This is the same God who gave Babylon, King Nebuchadnezzar, gave him Jerusalem. Wisdom was highly prized, very highly prized in the court of Babylon, as they thought it derived from Marduk, or Bel, the god of wisdom. Now, 3 different words are used here synonymously to describe their moral and their educational and their religious superiority. Knowledge, skill, learning, and wisdom. Now, Daniel alone, though, as we see here at the end of the verse, is singled out for his ability to decipher visions like Joseph. This ability to decipher visions was highly prized in the ancient Near East. It was considered a primary source, a primary means of understanding the will of the gods. And as we see here, it even exceeded the ability of being called or labeled wise. Now, of course, this kind of note at the end sets us up for the following chapter and the rest of the book, right? Daniel's ability, right, to understand visions. Verse 18. Verse 18. Liz.
Now at the end of the days that the king had said, you should bring them in, Then the prince of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar.
Okay. Now, many archaeological tablets, and here's a replica of one of them, relate to this lunar solar year. Okay? Now, one of these tablets relates to events in the years from 605 to 594, which would have been the 7th year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar. And nevertheless, the high point of these young men's training has finally arrived, and Melzar presents them to the king to give their oral and their physical examinations. Okay, so the 3-year calendar is up, and now is the day to give your oral exam. Verse 19. Zach?
Then the king interviewed them, and among them all none was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore they served before the king.
Okay, so once again, the author uses the young men's Hebrew names in order to identify them with the people of God, rather than identify them with the people of Babylon and their Babylon theophoric names. Now, why this particular order of names? There is something to order. You know, when Jacob goes to meet Esau, he puts his handmaids Bilhah and Zilpah first, then he puts Leah, then he puts Rachel, and then he lines up his children and he puts Joseph last in the line, because he's the most special to him. He doesn't want anything to happen to him. Why this order? Well, it's understandable why Daniel's name would be first. He's the author. Okay, he's the center, as it were, of the book. And some have thought that Azariah, whose name means Yahweh helps, that he's rendered last in the list to remind us that without Yahweh's help, none of these guys would overcome the world. Maybe. Verse 20. Liz?
And in all matters of wisdom and understanding that the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers that were in all his realm.
Okay, so we have no idea what actually consisted of the total content of their 3-year education. We don't need to know. We're just told what we need to know. Nevertheless, this expression is given, which means infinitely better, okay, to describe them, to convey the thought that these 3 young men increase in their learning, in their ability, in their wisdom, in their knowledge, and their skill than every single other person who was with them in their graduating class. Because God gave them the skill to overcome these terrific odds. Now, Proverbs 22:29. See a man diligent in his business, he shall not stand before mere men or normal men, he shall stand before kings. You never know where God can take you from here. You can stand before a king. It's possible. I was praying for the longest time that God would let me stand before a king and witness to them. I mean, how did that happen? What's that makes it happen? So, to make a long story short, 5 years later, I'm at Ein Harod in the Galilee, where Gideon was given his 300 men, the same spot. Just about, 3,200 years later. And we're doing evangelism, telling people about Jesus, and no one's really listening. And I turn around, and unannounced, from me to you, was the king. He just showed up for some kind of Arab-Jewish reconciliation by grace. Wow. Now, in this instance, I had to, with the bright yellow Jesus shirt on in Hebrew, which is like bullseye, I went right into the security fence. His guards, well, they really did, they just scattered. And I went right up to him and I made gentle eye contact. And I told him the gospel, 1 Corinthians 15, with my mouth. And I gave him the good hot shot, the New Testament in Hebrew. And he took it out. And at least that time I wasn't put in the police station. Not this. I've never been arrested, like I told Ren. I've been in the police station many times in Israel. Never arrested. Because you're diligent in your business and you ask Jesus to make things happen. And you can, a 50-person Bible college, you can do that stuff. If you're faithful, God can make that stuff happen. Big stuff. And little stuff. We see the number 10 here, again. Number 10 is, maybe it's just a balance, it's earlier mentioned, who knows. But just as a footnote, the number 10 is important in the world of the Jews. You need 10 men to a minyan to have a prayer meeting. You need 10 men in Judaism to conduct a wedding. You need 10 men in Judaism to make an official contract, i.e. Ruth 4. Then when Boaz up to the gate and sat him down there, and the kinsman of whom Boaz spake came by, unto whom he said, there it is, such a one, turn aside, sit down here. And he turned aside and sat down, and he took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, sit down. We have 10 to pray, to make something binding publicly, to perform a wedding, whatever. Okay, it's just a special, special number. Nevertheless, verse 21, as we round out the chapter, verse 21. Zach?
Thus Daniel continued until the first year of King Cyrus.
Okay, Daniel, now a court prophet for Nebuchadnezzar, as you can see right here. He would continue in this position of influence all the way down through the remaining 4 kings of the Babylonian Empire. Daniel would continue to minister both on and off the radar. Okay? Remember in chapter 5, he's like off the scene, kind of, which we'll get to later. He's kind of off the radar there. But nevertheless, from 539 all the way to about 605, he is ministering in the courts of Babylon. Not only that, he ministers in the reign of Cyrus, and thereby he witnesses the return of the remnant of Judah at the end of the 70-year captivity, which is, of course, prophesied in Jeremiah 25:11. It makes a point to mention that Daniel stayed in the palace until the first year of Cyrus. Now, is this King Cyrus II? Is this Cyrus the Great, who was the founder of the Medo-Persian Empire? We really don't know. But Josephus says, for whatever it's worth, that after the first year of Cyrus, Daniel was around 90 years old. Okay? This is 536, approximately. 536, approximately. At that time, Josephus says Daniel was 90, and he moved out of the palace, and he settled eastward in Persia, in the city of Susa, to close his career. And if you care, it's Antiquities 10.11.7. Whatever the case may be. It's probably, maybe true. Whatever the case may be. We know that Daniel continued to minister for the living God, the Most High God, in some capacity. Because in the 3rd year of his reign, that's the reign of Cyrus, which is mentioned in Daniel chapter 10, verse 1, he has a vision of the glory of God by the tiger's room. So we know that Daniel continued at least until the 3rd year of Cyrus. Well into his 90s, okay, ministering as an ambassador in Babylon, primarily to the Most High God.